Hello again. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to collect data samples, display log data, and back up the log data. So let's get started. I've prepared a little project here to get started with, and what I've done is I've just used some word set objects and set them to periodic bounce and have them cycling through these limits at these times, and I'm doing LW 10, 11, and 12, and that's going to be the data we log in our example project today. And here of course I've just got some sliders and one of our little pie charts displaying the current data. So let's go ahead and go to Objects and Data Logging, and go to Data Sampling, and we're going to add a new sample, and we'll just call this log data. We're actually taking a time-based sample, and we're going to take a sample every second. I will go ahead and show you that we could choose to use a trigger-based, and we could read a bit state in our PLC or our local HMI and trigger our sample based on that state. And we're gonna trigger based on a off to on transition, and in that case we can go ahead and even set the sampler to turn this bit off after the sample trigger bit is turned on, or if that was set from on to off, we could turn the bit back on afterwards. Or if we were just reading a bit based on something else in the program and you wanted to let it turn itself back off, you can leave that unchecked. And our read address, starting address, is going to be 10. And under data format, that's where we define the data type of our sample, how we want to interpret the data. Also, the number of sequential samples that we want to take. So our starting address is LW10, so we're going to add one new, and I'll call this sample 1. And we want 16-bit unsigned data type. And I'll add a couple more here. So I'm going to read register LW10, LW11, and LW12. 16-bit signed data, and unsigned data. So I'm going to go ahead and click exit, and you'll see here it showed that the display length is 3 words now. Here I can assign a hold address, and basically what this means is when this bit is on, we are not sampling data, and when it's off, we are. We have our control address, which is actually just a word register, and we can enter a 1 in there, and it'll clear all the samples in this particular log. These are internal registers, by the way. LB is internal bits, within the HMI, and LW is are some of the word registers. Here we can enable the history files, and if you'll notice, if I designate external media to store it in, the our control address gives us a few more functions here. You can clear everything, you can sync and clear, you can clear and restore the log index, or 5, you can recover from a freeze state. That were if you were to remove the media and it missed a backup, designated backup when the storage media wasn't in there. You could enter a 5 and it would go ahead and would sync any data that it had stored up and go ahead and get everything back to normal. You can enable a status address, and that is based on our control address, and so that tells us that LW, the next word up, LW1, would be status, and the LW0 would be the error codes. Down here we can actually name the name of our backup files, and I'll go a little more in depth with that, but let me just go ahead and call this sample log. Now this customized file handling, if I click on it, you'll see there's a little format example down here. If we go into settings, you can see we can add a format to the leading edge of the actual file, and we can tag it with some calendar and time information. And coincidentally, whenever this information in the leading edge here changes, it will go ahead and update a file based on whatever resolution this is set to. And what I mean by that, if you have, like in this example, year, month, and day, that means it will back up a file every time we go to a new day. If we added in hour on there, it would back up a file every hour, and of course it would name the file with the hour in the name right there. So I'm going to leave it like that right now and go ahead and click OK. Now here you can see, since I've enabled the customized file handling, our preservation limit has changed from days to files. So since we're taking a sample every hour now, because we're down to this resolution, we may want to bump that up, so to maybe 200 files or something like that, to get about the same amount of time logged. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And now we've got our data sampling object built. We're actually reading 3 different addresses in one sample here, and we'll exit out of that. I went ahead and made a couple of blank pages here so we can display our log data. We've got some display objects for our log data. We've got a trend display that we can use. Now here we can define the sampling object, and since we only made one, we've only got one choice here. We can include a watch line. This is something pretty cool. I'm just going to go ahead and address this to 100 so we're out of the way. And what this is, you can touch anywhere on the trend display, and it will give you a detail the actual value is in that slice in time. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there, and I'll put a display object up for LW200 to demonstrate that. Here is the distance between data samples. What that means is how wide a space you want between each sample. If we're in distance, we can put a representation in there for millimeters, or we can use a time reference. And what that is the overall time range of the display area. So in this particular case right here, we're going to display 100 seconds. So we'll go ahead and leave it like that for now. Under the Trend tab, here we can define the background. Would be transparent. You may want it to overlay on a graphic that you imported, or you can use standard layout that we have. You can change the frame color, of course, or the actual background, but we'll leave that generic for now. You can display a grid if you like, and of course you can define the distance in time, since we have time selected between each grid line. Here it says 4 seconds. Since we're doing tell you what, I'm going to make that 120 seconds. And we're going to do an interval every, let's say, 15 seconds. And the range on our data is 0 to 100. So I'm just going to do 4 divisions, and that's just what it'll display. We can include a time scale. This will put a timestamp below there, and of course we would want to do down to the second. And we can also define the time and date format for the watch line data. So when you clicked on there and displayed your watch line, this would actually be the time that will display up on your trend display. Under the Channel tab, you can define which samples are displayed, and I'm going to go ahead and check sample 1, 2, and 3. So if you notice here, I'll highlight channel 1, and of course here are the parameters for channel 1. Very basic. You can define the pen color, leave that one blue. You can define the width. Here this gives you a representation of what it would look like on there. Here you can define the limits. This is the limits for the channel. If you use dynamic limits, this would be 2 sequential registers, and it would either be in your local HMI or whichever PLC you had the driver defined for. So in this case, if I used dynamic limits, LW0 would be the low limit and LW1 would be the high limit. Or we can use static limits and just enter in the values here, 0 to 100. And we need to go ahead and define these parameters for each channel. Make these distinctly different colors. I will make that one green. 0 to 100. All right, there we go. So that's our basic display right there. So we'll go ahead and open this back up, and we'll move on to the Y-Scale tab. Now here you can actually define one of the samples to display the as the main axis. And use a different one for the auxiliary axis, either one of those. So let me go ahead and swap those back and show you what that looks like. Here now, that will go ahead and make this a little bigger for you. Control plus will actually enlarge your viewing area. Just a little quick tip there. Now as you can see, that placed a legend on the side and actually gave a scale based on the limits that were shown. Now if these were dynamic limits, this would actually could change. The actual limits of the display area could change. They could go up and down based on certain conditions or whatever. I'm sure you could think of a lot of different uses for that. All right, so let's move on. We'll go to our log page 2. We also have a historical data display. And it works somewhat the same. Here we can enable a grid, the column interval. We can define the frame and the background color. Here we can adjust the text, the font, the actual font and text size for it. You can define the time format and the date format and the color, of course. And this will actually, you can define the width of the display column over here. And of course we can decide whether we want ascending or descending time. Under the data format, you can decide which channels to display. You can actually assign it a format. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little something in there. So I'll go ahead and do that with the other channels as well. And display all three, and center format, so I do not want to display the leading zeros. Here under the title tab, we can actually give them a little more unique names than they had before. right here. Just highlight it and type it in there. I'll actually spell sample right this time. And that's what we'll display in the title at the top of it. And here we could actually assign it a different shape from the shape library. We've got some different formats, some different frame types that could be used for this. I don't think that would work too great, but that could even be your background or whatever. But we'll stick back with the original frame. So anyway, I'll go ahead and click OK. And as you can see here, what we've got is basically just sort of a spreadsheet style display here, and it will show in real time the samples as they're recorded. So spread that out a little bit so we can see all of them. So let me go ahead and do another offline simulation. We'll go ahead and see what it looks like. So we go to our log 2 page. You can see as our samples are collected, they go in. We're displaying the sample number and the time and so on and so forth. You can see there I was just displaying the hour. Let me change that format up a little bit. Look a little better. That looks a little better. We can actually go back and look at previous logs that were stored. Or you can go back to current, display those. Pretty cool stuff. Let's go ahead and put a numeric object here to display our watch line. I think I did LW200. Put that there. And we'll go ahead and run an offline simulation. Alright, we'll go ahead and go to log 1. And here you can see we're taking our samples. I can click on here and our watch line shows our value of our main axis. See there, and it gives you an accurate representation of where this intersects, where these two lines intersect. Pretty nifty. We can go in here and actually change this up a little bit if we want to view a larger or a smaller area at one time. We can go back to normal. We can actually come in here and view some extra ones. Since I'm running a simulation, I've got a couple saved where I ran this a couple times earlier. You can see there's really no data in that one. Or I can go back to current. One we have here. I can turn off the scales. Completely. And there they don't display. Can turn that back on, and I can switch which one is the primary scale and which would be the secondary. And see, it changed it to scale or samples 2 and 3. Pretty cool stuff. Let me go ahead and close that out for now. And that's the basics of data logging. Please come back and sure to watch more of our instructional videos.